guess what? We're making bread! Yay!
So my recipe for bread has been pinched from Delia Smith, but I've messed around with it a little bit. I've faffed around with it a lot over the last year to get it just right, because hers was okay, but it wasn't perfect. It still needed a little bit of work. So for the recipe you need salt, an alarming amount of salt, but trust me, you need it to make the bread taste like anything other than dried paper. Dried yeast. Hard to get at the moment, I realise, because everyone's been panic buying it, of course. But it turns out you can make your own yeast. I might include a recipe for that for you later. I put a little bit of baking powder in mine, just because I find it doesn't quite rise as much as it could unless you put a little bit of this in as well. And you need, I usually fill up a 900 millilitre jug with boiled water, because by the time you come to use it, it will be roughly sort of hand hot water, which is what will make the yeast grow in the bread.
These are my bread flour jars. They're 4 litres each. They're huge, which looks like I've been emptying all of the shelves of all of the flour, but don't worry, this is how much I normally buy at any normal point of the year, just to keep us in homemade bread for roughly 3 weeks, I would say. We eat a lot of bread, so we need quite a lot of flour. I normally buy it from a refill shop, so I need to make sure I've got plenty left just in case I can't get there. But this one's got plain white, strong bread flour in it. My second jar is normally just strong brown. I couldn't get that though, so this is rye flour. I've not used it yet, so it might turn out a little bit different to normal. We'll just have to see how that goes.
So we'll start with the white loaf. These always turn out the best for me. White always just works way better than brown, but I think the brown usually tastes a bit better, so up to you which one you prefer if you try it. Now you need 500 grams of the flour. And then with the flour you need about a teaspoon of dried yeast, roughly a teaspoon. It's meant to be 7 grams, but I tend to find that it's incredibly hard to weigh because it's really light. So you can end up with far too much yeast in it, and trust me, you can taste it. If you put too much in there, it ends up more like fermented bread than normal bread. You need, it's about a tablespoon of salt, which I know sounds crazy. It's a lot of salt. But I've tried using slightly less, I've tried using none at all, but it doesn't work. You definitely need the full amount. And then you need sort of, not too much baking powder, maybe another slightly heaped teaspoon. Now you mix the dried ingredients together. And you can create a well in the middle. This will be for the water to go in. That might be quite hard to show you that without spilling it everywhere. There's a little dent in the middle of the bowl. The water will go into that and it'll help us mix it without making too much mess.
Honestly, my camera has probably the worst battery known to man in it. We're not even halfway through and look at it, sat there charging. Shame on you, camera. So, here we are with the flour. I'll show you this way around instead of in the wide view. The water for the white flour, you only need roughly 360 mils of it. You need slightly more for the brown loaf because it absorbs more water. So you just pour it in. That'll do. And then mix it into the middle. So after a little while of mixing, you get this sort of gloopy dough. You keep mixing it until it sort of forms a ball. Now the important thing about this loaf is that it is a no-knead dough. This is why you don't get as much of a rise from it, because you don't need to work the gluten quite as hard, so it doesn't stretch and grow quite so much in the oven or while it's proving. But the important thing is that it is a quick loaf. I use this recipe just because I can do it really quickly after work, throw the loaves in the oven, they'll be ready before I go to bed. Of course that does mean your loaves will be slightly denser than you are used to. I personally really like the texture of that. It gives you a nice bit of chew to the loaf and it sort of fills you up a bit more because it takes longer to eat. Or at least I find it does anyway. Some members of the household still eat more than they should. So that's it, just about ready. I'll pop it into the tin. I'm not particularly precious about the bowls. I will make the brown loaf in the same bowl as the white loaf after I've emptied it out. Looks like a crash site at the moment, but I can assure you it is beautiful bread when it's finished. There we go, that's the white loaf in the tin. Now when you pour it in, it does sort of stay in its blob that you put in the middle. I normally spread it out across the tin a little bit just to make sure it rises evenly when you go to prove it. I also line my tins with, they're cake cases, I think, loaf tin cake cases. Shamed by the extra waste that this creates, I do use them twice before throwing them away. You can see that one's already been cooked. They're perfectly good to use twice. They only start ripping and tearing once you've baked them for that second time. Now, if you find that your loaf mix has come out slightly too wet, you can just add a bit more flour to it and mix it in before putting it in the tin. Equally, if it comes out too dry, you can just add a little bit more water until you get the right sort of consistency. It should be quite sticky, quite thick, but still a little bit more loose than a regular ball of dough. Equally, when you put it in the tin, I usually smooth over the top as much as I can. Sometimes if they don't rise as much as you want them to, the sort of knobbly bits go really crusty in the oven and can be quite hard to eat once you actually come to that point. So just smooth down the top as much as you can. So the brown loaf recipe is relatively similar. There are very few differences between the two. You still need 500 grams of flour. You still need the tablespoon of salt, teaspoon of baking powder and the teaspoon of yeast. The only difference is the water, really. You need to add 10 to 20 more millilitres of water to the brown loaf just to make sure that it's wet enough to bake. Otherwise it doesn't rise the same. Well, it still doesn't rise the same as the white anyway, I always find, but it still absorbs quite a bit more water than the white flour will. If you wanted to, of course, you can add seeds to the loaf. It's quite nice to add sunflower seeds, poppy seeds, mustard seeds even, that's all quite nice. I would say to any bread mix, only about 100 grams of seeds or extra additions to the loaf. 100 grams to 150 maybe. You don't want to overload the loaf because that could also affect its rise. It might make it even more dense than it already is, which you might not necessarily want. Time to make the brown loaf. If I can open the jar. Oh my god. There we go. Now I know I've said I've not used rye flour before, but that stuff is weird. That is like the thickest wallpaper paste I have ever made in my life. We shall have to see if that works. That one's going to be delicious. Not so sure about this one. The ugly duckling of the bread making world, do we think? Mind you, that one's starting to rise just a bit. You can sort of see it's got a dome across the top. The white loaves always do really well. They are super well behaved. So when it comes to proving your bread, I more often than not do it in the oven. I'll turn the oven up a tiny little bit just to warm it through, and then I can leave the tins with the bread dough in them just in the oven for a little while and they'll rise and prove really nice. If you don't want to use your oven, you want to save the electricity, for example, my other option is, see that tub up on the top shelf there? I would normally put both my tins in that and then either put in a mug of hot water with them or just fill the bottom of the tub with hot water as well. Close the lid, it creates a whole load of steam, really nice warm environment for the yeast to grow. Doesn't work as effectively as putting it in the oven for a little while, but that also works, so you can do that too. Of course, in the middle of summer, when it is super hot absolutely everywhere you go, you don't even have to prove them inside an oven or a tub or anything like that. You can literally just leave them on the side and then they'll do their thing. And they're going to go in the oven for about an hour to prove now. You can also prove them slowly in the fridge. So if you wanted to make the mix before you go to work in the morning, stick it in the fridge throughout the day. By the time you come home, they'll have proved just on a much slower scale. And then they'll be ready to bake as soon as you get back. Interesting. Risen a little bit. Even the rye one, which I'm surprised about. The white is a little bit flat, probably because I've been messing around with the cameras quite a bit. It's not been done as quickly as I should have done, so the water wasn't quite as warm enough. But it will rise a little bit more once it's cooked because of the baking powder, which is always quite useful. So they just need to go in at about 180 degrees for roughly 45 minutes, possibly a bit less, depending on your oven, really. Mine's a fan oven, so you might need to convert the temperature for other types of oven. Right, well, the bread alarm's gone off. Ooh. Always a good idea to get the loaves out of the tins as soon as possible. If they stay in the tins, they tend to get a little bit soggy.
always rest my loaves upside down on top of the tins so that they air cool this way around. And if you tap the bottoms, if they're cooked, they should always sound hollow. Still not sure about that rye loaf. There we go. It's about the standard for one of my white loaves. They're never very tall, but they are so tasty, honestly, you won't even notice the difference in height. I much prefer this bread to shop bought bread, and of course it means you don't use up all those plastic bread bags that you get from the shop as well. There's no weird additives or anything in them, so that's always a plus. That's the strangest thing I've ever seen. Like, what even is that? I'm not going to cut into them just yet. It's always best to cut them the day after you've baked them, because if you cut them straight away, as tempting as that is, because they are really nice that way with just butter, and it's quite hard to cut through them because the middles are still quite doughy. So wait till they've cooled, carve them up. They freeze really easily as well. We put a lot of ours into the freezer. I'll show you the bread bags that I use in a minute as well. To avoid all the plastic, I've made my own bread bags that can go in the freezer. That's one of my bread bags. Cute little bee pattern on the front. It's literally just a cotton tote bag that I've stitched the bottom down onto and used the handles as a drawstring. So you put the loaves in that, tie it up, and it'll go in the freezer and it'll be perfectly fine like that. It does have to be cotton, and I mean, if there's ever a good way to use a cotton bag, this is it. They use so much sort of water and there's a lot of waste that comes out of the cotton industry. It's a good idea to use these as much as you possibly can, because as much as they are better than plastic, there's a lot of negativity involving the cotton industry, so use them as much as you can. So once again, guys, I really hope this has been useful for you, informative. If you've never made bread before, seriously go do it. It is so much better than what you buy in a shop. Maybe not quite so good as a professional bakery, but at least you've made it yourself. There's something tasty about something that you've just made yourself, isn't there, really? Anyway, see you guys next week for another video. I've got some good plans for the next one. I hope you enjoy that too. Bye, guys.